but thank you very much for organizing this. I'm going to talk about the work that I do, which is really focusing on how people adapt to changing contexts. And in particular, the type of work that I do is related to climate change, global markets that are affecting households and communities, or new knowledge that's coming in that may make a difference in the life of farmers. So in this picture is just an example of the families that we've been working with in Kenya, looking at GMOs. And the next one relates to the work that we've been doing in the Andean region to understand how families can cope and adapt in a good way, in a sustainable way, to the changes that are being that are happening in those environments because of key drivers. And so in the work that we do in the Andes, what we start with always is understanding what people know, because the people that live in rural communities have been there for centuries and have been adapting to changes that have been happening for the hundreds of years. And that's very typical in the Andean region of South America, where farmers have been using biophysical indicators to really understand the forecasting for the farming system for a key commodity, which is a potato, which is really a key resource for food security. What we find is that in this context where Rosita and others have been making decisions, and I met her back in 1998 when we were working with NOAA to understand how climate forecasts could be useful for decision making and coping with ENSO or El Niño events. What we are finding out today as we're working in the highlands and teams that are interdisciplinary is that for the past 50 years, there has been an increase in temperature in these mountain regions where people are living, and that the projections are not nice, that actually by end of century, we're talking about 40 degrees Celsius increases in temperature on average. So a very different climate regime for the people living in those environments that is really going to affect farming, because it's changing the way in which rainfall patterns fall, and it's going to affect soil moisture in those environments, and it's already doing it because of the temperature increases. Why do we know this? We know this because we were working with atmospheric scientists and farmers together and social scientists like Jerry to understand what's going on in the context. In order for it to come up and understand what can we do about it. But in order to understand what can we do about it, we need to also understand how people can use new knowledge in order to make decisions. And what we find, that's a picture of a lady that lives near the lake in the mountain regions, whose average income in a year is $600, who has very low levels of education and very little land, and therefore is not able to put that land in fallow in order for it to be replenished, as traditionally has been done for centuries in this environment. There are pests and disease, the Andean weevil is changing, and they weren't aware of that. They were aware that there was more incidence, but not really what was going on in the biology of that change. We find that families are losing their crops to these pests. They're losing crops to frost, and they're losing their animals to diseases. And animals are really key asset to the families. This is coupled with the fact that their perceptions of those risks, those events to their livelihoods is very high. So they feel a very high level of dread about these events that they're feeling, that they're experiencing. And so when you couple families with low income and many high risks that threaten their livelihoods, and with the fact that there are very many changes happening, the likelihood of taking on new knowledge is going to be very low. People trust that they do better in their traditions than what they're learning from the outside. So the idea, therefore, is how do we engage in meaningful knowledge? And the way we've been doing this together with interdisciplinary teams of faculty from many sciences, but also from across nations, across communities, a very intercultural, actually, approach to looking and understanding how can we create meaningful knowledge, is working really through participatory research processes that engage farmers in order to build the trust that's needed for people to be able to take a chance in new knowledge when especially they are at a food security level that is very low. And so creating that process as well as creating linkages with institutions in the countries and especially the research and teaching institutions in the country in collaboration with farmers actually creates something that's not been there, which are the networks of information that are trusted, that are needed in order to use new knowledge and be able to create new knowledge actually for this changing context. As some of our students were talking this morning, for example, in the bean production, and the fact that you're developing a variety that should be more able to work better in a drought context. At the same time as how do we get that knowledge out and it's trusted for the farmers to be able to use that type of knowledge. And so in our case, we focused on climate, we focused on pests and diseases, working together with plant pathologists, with soil scientists, with atmospheric scientists, with social scientists, and our partners in every place that we've been working at with the idea of creating networks of collaboration and strengthening capacities that are there long term. And this is an example of what we did working with soils in the mountain regions with Professor Montevalli. If you don't know him, he's in soil and atmospheric sciences, working with students from Bolivia, in this particular case, students from the U.S., as well as faculty from the universities and people from the rural communities, and purposely developing methodologies that include women in the processes as we're developing the knowledge. Because mostly they're there most of the year while men are migrating out to work. So they're key decision makers that not only take care of the security of their households, but also of the productive activities on the farm. We also have been working on engaging in meaningful knowledge in conversations about benefits and risks of releasing GM cassava for food security in Kenya, funded by the Templeton Foundation. And again, in this process, we work with different types of stakeholders, starting with the farmers, people that work on processing, people that are in NGOs or doing private sector development, and scientists. And you can see scientists there that are from the local institutions, and Bill Folk, that's back there. If you have known Bill Folk, you'll see him there. With the white hair in the background. And so the idea, again, is creating those linkages and connections, because we all know a piece of the puzzle, but working together, we can come up with alternatives that address the barriers. In many cases, extension doesn't work in a good way, or maybe extension doesn't exist, and actually the NGOs are the ones that are there. And these are places where there's a lot of stress, a lot of significant levels of threats to the livelihoods of people. This comes from the information that women and men shared in these communities. Very high levels of shocks, continuous, which means going into a poverty trap, and therefore a lot of insecurity and a very difficult ability to learn in that context. So creating trust and figuring out ways of working together that work for vulnerable people is really key in order for this to happen. And so we've been working on what we all call translational research, the whole process of starting with the key decision makers and the knowledge that's locally available in the institutions, in the rural communities, in the households between men and women. And develop participatory processes and collaborative processes that bring people together in conversations. In this particular case, how to communicate GM. In contexts where people don't know at all about it and where governments are going to make decisions about the release or not of these. So these are some of the very, very brief notes that I have in terms of the importance of working together, figuring out institutions that are local, that will be there, that are willing to include the vulnerable, in particular when we're talking about adaptation issues, and developing processes purposely ahead of time, understanding how we're going to collaborate, what are the incentive structures, and how the research is going to come together with the practice on the ground.